Tasmania used to have one of the best public transport systems in Australia. It was the first place in the Southern Hemisphere to have an electric tram network, and one of the first in the world to have an extensive fleet of double-decker trams. Tasmania was also the first state in Australia to run diesel trains on a mainline railway. But those days are over. The state's public transport system is now plagued by congestion problems, a disrupted bus service, and the lowest per capita investment in the country.
Some people believe a return to rail could be the solution.
Passenger rail operated in Tasmania from 1871 and ended in 1978, when the last train, the Tasman Limited, made its final departure from Wynyard to Hobart.
We are preparing a submission which we'll be putting before the Commission and before the Commonwealth Government that this train ought to be continued.
After that, the second line of tracks along Hobart's Northern Rail Corridor were replaced with the intercity cycleway.
I've been in the railway business nearly all of my life.
Tony Cohen knows Tasmanian trains.
I joined the Tasmanian Government Railways in December 1966 as a trainee engineman. The Tasman Limited was a great train. It was renowned as probably being the most luxurious train in Australia for most of its life. The main Tasman Limited, as everybody remembers, was the locomotive haul train, which had articulated carriages, held 76 seats in it. They all had buffets, and the seats were aeroplane style, very comfortable, and they had little trays you could pull out and sit in front of you. You could smoke in those days, so there were ashtrays there too. It had a hostess on it, plus waitresses and people who worked in the buffets to prepare meals. They had meals on board. It wasn't the fastest one in the world, and that's due to the terrain that it had to travel over, but it could get up to 45 miles an hour or 72 kilometres per hour.
Tony says rail services must be brought back to Tasmania.
Of course, it's needed, and it's ridiculous not to have it. Just like any other sensible city in the world does. You know, it's a no-brainer.
The state government favours buses over rail, but that hasn't stopped some Tasmanians from pushing for its revival.
So the Hobart Rail Action Group was formed in 2009, and we have been campaigning for a return to passenger rail on the Hobart Northern Suburbs Railway since that time.
The Action Group proposes a single-line light railway on existing tracks with 13 stops between Hobart CBD and the suburb of Bridgewater, just over 20 kilometres away.
The benefits for rail are quite considerable. It's much more smoother ride, more comfortable ride. It's much more environmentally friendly. Rail is 7 times more energy efficient than buses. It's a much better access for people who have poor mobility, parents with prams, cyclists, and it's also just much more popular in terms of a public transport option.
If Hobart had a rail service, would you use rail or a bus?
I would certainly use rail because, I've seen it in Sydney and Melbourne and it works really well.
Probably the rail if they had one.
I'd probably use rail. I've heard rail is just a lot cheaper and a lot faster. I think the current bus system is a little bit outdated, so a rail would definitely be very nice.
There should be a train from Hobart right out to Brighton. And what it does, it'll take more traffic away from the city.
I probably would, yeah, but I live on the Eastern Shore, so I don't know how that would work. But yeah, I would. Any sort of public transport I would like.
The state government hasn't completely ruled out light rail, but it has recently released a growth strategy for the transit corridor that is based on rapid bus services.
So, how will that work?
Under the strategy, the remaining rail line would be removed and replaced with a road for rapid buses within 5 years. 5 stops would be built between Glenorchy and Newtown to move people from the northern suburbs into the city. So, why buses and not trains? A report commissioned by the state government says the existing railway line needs a complete replacement, along with upgrades to level crossings and signal lights. Tasmania's Transport Minister Erica Betts says it's mostly about cost.
Does everybody like the idea of light rail? I think so. The question then is, do they like the potential cost that it will be to the taxpayer? Not so much.
A 2020 report shows light rail costing $685 million to establish, and a busway $512 million, although these prices are expected to have since grown. Annual operational costs would also be much less for buses.
If Hobart had a rail service, would you use rail or take a bus?
I still take the bus.
So I probably will take both. Just see which one is suitable, like the timing and things.
Our city is not designed to carry the amount of people that it has. Infrastructure is just not suitable. It's not sustainable in the long run to be hoping that the buses will improve, especially because the roads are not designed to carry as much traffic as they do.
Would you still take the train if it costs taxpayers a little bit more to build?
Depends how much. Depends how much. Like if it's really like going to be a very costly sort of adventure, I'd probably think otherwise. You know, we've got a similar sort of issue with the stadium coming at the minute.
But it's not all just buses versus trains, as the state government has been focusing on water transport too.
It appears as though a ferry service might be a more beneficial mode of public transport to try to get cars off the road.
There's been a resurgence of ferry transport in Hobart, but it has its limits. It doesn't run outside of peak hour on weekdays or at all on Sundays. It also only runs between Bellerive and Hobart, although there are plans for expansion. Toby says Tasmania should take a leaf out of Canberra's book, which started a light rail service in 2019.
We know that in Canberra, on the light rail there, 43% of users are new to public transport. So that's a huge percentage of people who've gotten out of their cars to use public transport. They didn't do that for buses. The government definitely needs to revisit its decision.
The railway tracks won't be the only casualty of a new busway service.
The current Bridgewater Bridge is earmarked to be pulled down. There's no other way the railway line can get across the river to get into Hobart except there. Bridgewater Bridge, again, is heritage listed because of its design. It has to stay there. Hobart's population will increase in another 50, 60 years to probably 750,000 people. It's going to need rail services to cart people around because we're spreading bigger and bigger, going further out in all directions.
With the future of Tasmania's public transport system still uncertain, only time will tell if rail will ever make a return to Hobart.